Taking Flight Our Singapore Stories. I'm Munah Bagharib, and with me are actors, of course. Okay, let's get straight into it. First and foremost, does Singapore have any stories to tell?
First thing I think of is relativism, because the social behavior and the culture of the Singapore society is unique in its own way. There is no Singapore but Singapore. And I would be telling you childhood stories that are different from someone of the same age who grew up in Australia or America, or even in Europe, or even in a nearby country like Indonesia. So to begin with, childhood stories, that in itself is different. So for example, in Australia, children these days grow up with a backyard. Most of us live in HDB houses. We don't have a backyard.
So you say void deck.
Yeah, void deck.
Playground.
You know what I mean? So there are some things that we have stories that are far unique than people from around the world.
We need to think beyond that. We need to think our individual lives of people, the common people that you see at coffee shops, McDonald's, Starbucks, from China Club down to, Clark Lee clubs. So it's diverse, and I think we should not cookie cut, and we should not look just within our shows, because Singapore's story is also a diaspora sojourner story overseas.
No, you're absolutely right. The point I'm making is that people write a lot of those stories.
Yes.
If you look at the Singapore art scene from a writer's perspective or a poet's perspective, I find very cutting edge writing happening here.
Yeah.
But transforming that writing into theater or television or film, that transition isn't happening, and I believe it's not happening because the economics of it is stopping it from happening. Because you write a book, I think the cost of publishing a book is far less than the cost of producing a movie. And until we solve the problem of the economics of the business, you're never going to see this transition of the wonderful stories you're talking about, and you're spot on, onto the stage or film or television.
I just want to say that actually sometimes the economics of it actually prevents good quality products from actually seeing the light of day, because people are so caught up in like, oh, can this story make money? Oh, maybe we shouldn't do this because, oh, maybe we should throw in a Hollywood face so that we can sell
A Bollywood face.
A Hollywood face so that we can sell it to India or to China or to wherever, LA or whatever. Or we should like put a Hong Kong model so that we can sell the show.
Authenticity.
And you lose the authenticity because
That's
they
true.
don't speak the right they don't understand the lingo, and they don't carry the right accents. And also, I guess, on some level, other things like censorship also kind of comes into play to prevent a really truly authentic story from being told. And also, again, because of the economics, it's also the casting, and it's so important now to cast like people with a lot of followers. I know, Munah, you've got plenty of followers, and I love you. And I think you're a great actress, but not every Instagrammer who can take a beautiful picture is a great actor, and they often feel the need to put somebody with a lot of followers in a leading role to attract their followers to watch the show, and they compromise on the quality of the production in the end.
The problem is, previously, a lot of the things that they show is not really accurate. I don't connect to it because it's not true. Like, I don't feel the connectivity. So I think in recent times with Hush or with Teng, like there is a sense that it's becoming more real, So I think that is why like local production is, the ratings are going up and things like that, because people want to watch local stuff because they want to see something that they can relate.
Okay, very good. Marginalized minorities. That's something I think the Singaporean society, we're afraid to talk about it, and we're afraid to create more content, because I think the only way for people to kind of understand issues without you standing there and preaching like this is what we should do is the arts, by watching something, by like reading something.
I think hiding is really the basis of what's happening in the arts now. The hiding of what could potentially be good material to be started here in Singapore. Like, local flavors. Like for example, not to diss, but on Tanglin, you don't even see a Eurasian family, when the Eurasians are actually part of Singapore as well. What do they go through? What are the problems that they face? Filmmakers are actually not hiding. They're actually quite brave in terms of trying to put material out there that would be deemed acceptable.
Yeah.
But because some things are not acceptable in this country, that's where the fear comes in. No matter how they try and pitch an idea, it's never going to come through because,
But could it also be because they don't want to risk it?
Yeah.
Because don't get me wrong, and again, I speak as a minority, but is it maybe because they don't want to risk putting a story about a minority? You know what I mean? When they want to target a Chinese audience because there is a bigger population of that. For example, hypothetically speaking.
I guess maybe you could be right that they don't want it's because of the target audience and all of
Target
that.
audience,
Yeah.
that's right.
But if I don't think that it matters on the audience, because if we are at a real cosmopolitan city, we wouldn't mind hearing these stories and we wouldn't mind sharing them.
The question is, how much of it is self-censorship and how much of it is really people don't allow? Because sometimes people think, oh, they're not going to approve this, so why should I write this thing? I just try my efforts in somewhere else and do something else. So I believe, I'm the believer in always, if you try, maybe, just maybe you can get this story through. If a Eurasian writes her own story, maybe she'll be able to, how like I did Emily of Emerald Hill, how the Peranakans write their own story per se. And Peranakans are quite big. They did Little Nonya and all this kind of things. They do recognize the Peranakans, maybe because the Malay Chinese and the Asians, so-called in that way, correct? But I think a lot of it's self-censorship. I don't think they're going to approve this if I don't write it. But recently, like Tango, by Pandemonium, Tango, they push boundaries in the sense. They dared to speak about these things and put it out in the open. And there are such families. There are such same-sex families. And despite all the naysayers, people saying, no, these families shouldn't exist, but they dare to put it out there. And it managed to go through and it's well received. So
when it comes to defining a Singapore story, because I think Singapore as a nation is already very young, and so I think we are constantly in the process of finding what that story is and what we are about as a nation. So I think because what happened was the most recent production that I did, La Cage aux Folles by Wild Rice, La Cage aux Folles, I keep getting it wrong, because it's large. It's based in, I hope I say it right, Saint-Tropez, and it's basically a gay club that is based in Saint-Tropez, but they've just taken it and moved it into Tanjong Pagar, and so basically the commentary is relevant because there are like gay bars in Tanjong Pagar, and there was the Boom Boom Room, and it was the biggest thing for a very long time, and there was this whole culture of drag that kind of was given birth to in that area. And so I think finding your voice through somebody else's is also a way of telling your own story, because the only thing that was French about the show was the name, because everything was relevant, everything was local, everything could be connected to. And I think if you struggle finding your own voice or how to tell your own story, it's perfectly alright to look at somebody else's and go, my story kind of feels like that as well.
The stories from every little bit of life here that qualifies as Singapore's story.
Anytime you have a Singaporean who's able to tell an honest story, it becomes a Singaporean story automatically. I think the problem happens when we try to define what Singaporean is, and then because it's different things to different people, right?
For posterity's sake, our younger people should be aware of how we have worked up to now. There are a lot of stories that we have, especially the older generation. We have a lot of stories on how we grew up and things like that, which I hope will one day be made into a full-fledged film instead of just short films, touching on certain aspects. But if they could just, like, I grew up in a communal living how we grew up together in that kind of a living condition, which was really sharing toilets, sharing kitchen and things like that, which the young are not really aware of, and they don't know that that was how the older generations lived. So if that could be made into a play would not be feasible, but a movie, which I don't think there has been a movie based on that yet. So that'll be something very good that we will be able to treasure.
It really depends on what your target is. Are you trying to target the international, the Hollywood market? If you are, then yes, you do need to speak proper English in order to reach out to those places. But if you are actually trying to bring authenticity, a certain level of authenticity to what you are putting out there, then I think a real genuine accent is important. Like Michelle Yeoh, she has made the choice to use her natural Malaysian accent in the next Star Trek series. So and that I think is it's admirable.
Good for her.
Yeah, it breaks my heart when people trade authenticity for what the mass public would like to hear, especially with these Western countries. Of course, they're not going to be used to our accent, right? That's why all of us, we can code switch from Singlish to something a little bit more quote-unquote international. But if it's for art, I think it is important for it to be as authentic as possible. Obviously, if it's staged, right, then there has to be an in-between, but it's not going to be traded for something fully theirs, because then what's the point of creating our own story if it comes out sounding like one of theirs?
And I think we've got a complex here that needs to be resolved from a language perspective as to who are we and how do we want to be heard. Once you resolve that, then everything becomes simple. If you want to be heard in Singlish, subtitle it. People will say, this is it's some sorts of pidgin English, but if you're pretending to be English and expecting him to understand that English, is obviously not going to happen.
But I think we're caught in quite a unique situation here in Singapore, because we are brought up on so much American TV, and a lot of my classmates, when I was 13, all of them had this American accent, and they all think that they are from LA. And the thing is that they are brought up in Singapore, and we know.
No, it's like our radio DJs.
Yeah.
It's an outstanding example. I have never heard that accent. The radio DJ accent is a very unique accent in Singapore. You will not hear it in Singapore or outside Singapore.